My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We're looking at the correlation between 1 Corinthians 15 and Paul's discussion of the resurrection and Romans chapters 5 through 8. These are directly parallel chapters, okay? And we're focused on the fact that Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 56, that the resurrection would be when the sting of death would be removed. And the sting of death is sin. Well, Paul in Romans talks about sin bringing death. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, so then death passed upon all men, because all men sinned. Romans 5:12. Well, likewise, Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death. Just like God told Adam and Eve, in the day you eat, in other words, the day you sin, you will surely die. And thus Paul says, the wages of sin is death. Just like Paul will say in Romans chapter 7, I was alive once without the law. The commandment came, sin revived, and I died. Oh, wait a minute. That's the story of Adam. Adam and Eve were alive. The commandment came, do not eat the fruit. They broke the commandment. Sin revived, as it were, and they died. You see, Romans 5 through 8 is the recapitulation of the story of Adam and Eve. It doesn't introduce another death. It doesn't tell the story of two deaths. It tells the story of sin and death. Now, in our last video, I asked the question, is biological death the direct result of sin? Well, we are told that when God told Adam and Eve, in the day you eat, you will surely die, that it is physical death. In one recent Facebook exchange, I was assured biological death was, quote, part of the curse. Well, if it's part of it, it's half of it. Okay? And let me remind you again, God did not say, in the day you eat, you'll die twice. He didn't say you'll die once spiritually this very day, and then, oh, by the way, you'll die again in 900 years. That's a theological fabrication that is not in the text. I hope you've gone to my website, donkpreston.com, and looked up the article by Dallas Burdett. Just do a search in the article archives for Dallas Burdett and the death of the garden. You'll be absolutely blown away with how powerful the evidence is to show God only threatened them with one death. A death and the death that they would experience that very day. Well, they didn't die biologically that day. But they were cast out of the garden that day. They were cast out of the presence of God that day. They were alienated from God that day. So I posed the question in the last video, is biological death the direct result of sin? Now, I've got to share something with you right here, a little bit of an anecdote. In numerous formal public debates, I have asked my opponents this very question. Is biological death the direct result of sin? Now, let's give a little bit of a backdrop here. What's the backstory? Every person that is born in the world today is born subject to physical death. The moment they are born biologically, they are subject to physical death. The tiniest infant, 2 seconds old, is subject to physical death. Now look, I have to tell you, I stand opposed to the doctrine of total hereditary depravity. I do not believe that infants are born in sin. I do not believe that infants are born with the sin and the guilt and the depravity, so-called depravity, of Adam. Adam wasn't born depraved or created depraved. When Jesus was given children by the crowds brought the children to him, he set them on his lap and he said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, for of such are the kingdom of heaven." Now look, if they're totally depraved, if they're totally sinful, inheriting the sin and the guilt and the death of Adam, then how could Jesus say this is what the kingdom is like? No, I don't believe that doctrine will stand up under scrutiny. So, if children are born sinless, and yet they are born subject to physical death, then it is more than obvious that sin did not cause their human mortality, right? And it wasn't the sin of their mom and dad. Man won't die for the sins of his father, according to Ezekiel 18 and Ezekiel 33. The soul that sins, it shall die. And so, if an infant is subject to biological death and yet has no sin, then it is more than obvious that sin doesn't bring human mortality. It does not, physical death is not the direct result of sin. If it is, ask yourself the following. Now remember, the question is physical death the direct result of sin? Yes or no? I mean, really, for those who take the view of a yet future physical resurrection, that ought to be a real easy question. Is physical death the direct result of sin? Yes or no? In several formal public debates, I have asked that question. And my debate opponents, understanding and realizing that if they say, yes, physical death is the direct result and consequence of sin today, then that means that if I'm a child of God, forgiven of sin, the one thing, the only thing that brings physical death, okay? Then if I am a child of God forgiven of sin, I should not be subject to physical death. Do you catch the power of that? And so in those debates, my opponents have actually said, in answering my question, is physical death today the direct result of sin? They have actually said, gone on record as saying, no, physical death is no longer the direct result of sin. Really? At what point of time and with what event did that incredible change take place? My goodness gracious, what a fatal admission. Physical death was the direct consequence of Adam and Eve's sin. Christ came to solve the curse of Adam, to remove the curse of Adam. Today, physical death is not the direct result of sin. Therefore, Christ has already removed the Adamic curse of Adam. Victory! We're not going to die physically as a result of sin. Well, again, when did the change come? At which point of time biological death is no longer the direct result of sin. Now remember, Paul in Romans 6, the wages of sin is death. Well, Paul, are you talking about physical or spiritual? Well, according to my debate opponents, it can't be physical anymore. Praise God. Oh, but wait. What about spiritual death? You mean to tell me that Christ has removed the physical Adamic curse, but he hasn't removed the spiritual Adamic curse? And yet these are the very people who make that argument that physical death is no longer the direct result of sin, are the very people who tell us in Romans chapter 6, 1 through 10, that when a person enters baptism, the body of sin is destroyed. They're raised from spiritual death. Do you see what they've done? They've destroyed spiritual death and they've destroyed physical death by their own words. Okay, we've got more on the wages of sin is death. But please ask yourself the question, is physical death the direct result of sin today? Yes or no? How you answer that question will help develop your theology of resurrection. Hey, we've got more, and it's great stuff. And we'll see you on the flip side.